If you have ever loved someone who pulls away the moment things get real, who goes cold right when the connection deepens, who seems to self-sabotage every beautiful thing the two of you build together, and you have sat alone wondering whether any of it was ever real, whether you were imagining the depth of what passed between you, whether they ever actually felt something genuine, or whether you were simply a convenient warmth they leaned into until it asked too much of them, this is for you. Because the answer is more complicated than yes or no, and understanding it might be the most painful relief you have ever felt. The signs that an avoidant authentically loves you are almost never the signs you were taught to look for. They do not show up in the ways that secure love shows up. They are hidden inside behaviors that look, on the surface, like anything but love. And if no one ever translates them for you, you will spend years misreading a language that was never taught to you. That translation is what this is. The first thing that needs to be said, before anything else, before any of the signs or the psychology or the patterns, is that understanding an avoidance love does not mean excusing the damage it causes. These two things need to live in separate rooms in your mind. Because one of the most common traps that people fall into when they start to understand avoidant attachment is that the understanding becomes a reason to stay in something that is quietly destroying them. Trauma explains behavior. It never justifies it. And avoidance wounds are real. Their fear is real. Their love, when it is present, is real. And they are still responsible for the wreckage their patterns leave behind. Both things are true. Hold both. An avoidant does not love lightly. This is perhaps the most important and least understood fact about their psychology. Because the cultural narrative around avoidance tends to frame them as people who cannot love, or who love shallowly, or who are fundamentally incapable of genuine attachment. And that narrative, while convenient, is wrong. The truth is almost the opposite. Avoidants feel deeply. The problem is not the depth of their feeling. The problem is that the depth of their feeling is, to them, the most terrifying thing in the world. To understand why, you have to go back to the beginning of their story. Not your story with them. Their story long before you arrived. Because avoidant attachment does not develop in a vacuum. It is built. It is constructed, layer by layer, in the earliest and most formative emotional environments of a person's life. In environments where emotional needs were consistently unmet, dismissed, or punished. Where a child reached for connection and found distance. Where vulnerability was treated as weakness or inconvenience. Where love was either unpredictable, conditional, or delivered with strings so thick the child had to become someone else entirely to receive it. In those environments, the child learns something devastating. They learn that needing people is dangerous. They learn that expressing emotion leads to rejection or overwhelm, or being left alone with feelings that are too large to carry alone. And so they do the only logical thing available to a developing human in an unsafe emotional environment. They shut the valve. They build the wall. They learn to be self-sufficient in ways that look, from the outside, like independence and strength. But from the inside, they are a kind of prolonged holding of breath. A constant vigilance. A life lived at careful distance from the very thing they need most. That is not a character flaw. That is survival. That is an intelligent nervous system doing exactly what it was designed to do in response to pain. But here is what that survival costs them when they grow up and find themselves falling in love with you. It costs them everything. When an avoidant begins to feel authentic love for someone, it does not feel like joy to them first. It feels like danger. The closer they get to you, the louder the alarm in their nervous system becomes. Because closeness, to the deepest part of their brain, is not associated with safety. It is associated with the pain that closeness historically delivered, with the vulnerability that was historically punished, with the need that was historically met with absence. So when their feelings for you deepen, when the connection between you starts to feel real and significant and hard to walk away from, their system does not say, wonderful, something good is happening. It says, danger. It says, this is the thing that has always hurt you. It says, leave before it destroys you. And many of them do leave, or they create enough distance to manage the fear, or they pick a fight that gives them a legitimate feeling reason to retreat. Or they go quiet and pull back and hope that enough space will drain some of the feeling away until it reaches a level they can manage without their walls crumbling. But here is what they cannot control, no matter how hard they try. They cannot control that the feeling is there. They cannot entirely extinguish what is real. And so the love persists underground beneath all that distance and all those walls, and all that maddening, infuriating, deeply painful withdrawal. It persists because it is authentic. Because it was never performance. Because it was always, underneath everything, the truest thing in them. So how do you actually recognize it? How do you know with any confidence that what an avoidant feels for you is genuine love and not simply attachment born of habit or the comfort of familiarity? Because those are different things, and conflating them is a mistake that will cost you years. The first sign, and it is one of the most counterintuitive things you will ever hear about love, is that they are afraid of you. Not afraid of you as a person. Afraid of what you represent. Afraid of what you make them feel. Afraid of how much easier everything seems when you are there, and how that ease makes them terrifyingly dependent in ways they cannot control. You will feel this fear as distance, as coolness, as the inexplicable emotional temperature drop that happens right after a particularly close or tender moment between you. You will feel it as the retreat that follows intimacy. Not just physical intimacy, but emotional intimacy. Vulnerability intimacy, the kind of closeness that happens when both people see each other clearly and the seeing feels safe and rare and like something neither of you wants to lose. That retreat, that almost reflexive pulling back after openness, that is fear. And that fear only exists because the love is real. You do not run from things that do not matter. You do not build walls against feelings that are shallow or expendable. The height of the wall is proportional to the depth of the feeling they are trying to protect themselves from. The more they retreat after tenderness, the more the tenderness meant. This is the brutal, backwards grammar of avoidant love. The second sign is far more visible, and most people miss it anyway because they are looking in the wrong direction. Watch what they do, not what they say or do not say. Watch the small, unannounced actions. The avoidant who loves you genuinely will show up in practical, concrete ways that they will never frame as love, never announce as love, and possibly never even consciously connect to love. They will notice things. They will remember the specific thing you mentioned 3 weeks ago that meant something to you, and they will quietly make it happen. They will be there in a crisis in ways that surprise you, because in an emotional emergency, their defenses around emotional expression drop just enough for action to become available. They will do things, fix things, arrange things, handle things, show up in the physical world in ways that, if you translate them correctly, say exactly what they cannot bring themselves to say with words. Because for someone who learned that emotional expression is dangerous, actions became the safe language of feeling. They could not say "I love you" without the vulnerability of those words making them feel like they had just handed someone a weapon. But they could do something. They could be useful. They could solve the problem. They could show up in ways that required effort and attention without requiring them to sit in the open exposure of direct emotional declaration. This is not ideal. This is not what you deserve as a complete emotional experience. But it is real, and when you see it for what it is, when you recognize the action as the displaced word, the gesture as the withheld sentence, the love in it is undeniable. The third sign is the one that tends to cause the most confusion and the most pain, because it looks nothing like love from the outside. It looks, in fact, like the opposite of love. It looks like rejection. When an avoidant loves you authentically, they will pick fights with you. They will create distance through conflict. They will say things in moments of emotional overwhelm that seem designed to push you away. And on some level, they are. But not because they do not want you. Because they are terrified that you will leave. And creating a reason for you to leave feels more controllable than waiting in the agony of not knowing when the inevitable loss will come. It is preemptive self-protection. It is a nervous system trying to manage the unmanageable. It is, in its broken and damaging way, a form of trying to take control of a situation, your presence, your significance, their own feelings, that feels overwhelmingly out of their control. The fights that seem to come from nowhere, the provocations that appear right after closeness, the inexplicable coldness that follows warmth, none of that is indifference. All of it is fear wearing indifference as a costume. And that fear, as has already been said and must be said again, does not excuse the impact it has on you. It does not make it acceptable for you to absorb conflict and confusion as though it is your job. But understanding that it is fear and that the fear is proportional to the love is critical to understanding what you are actually dealing with. The fourth sign is perhaps the most quietly devastating one, and it is this: they cannot fully leave. An avoidant who does not love you can leave. An avoidant who does not love you can withdraw and not feel the pullback. They can create distance and maintain it without something in them constantly straining against it. They can move on in a clean, uncomplicated way because there was nothing deep enough to keep a hold of them. But when they love you, when what exists between you is genuine, the withdrawal is always incomplete. There is always a thread. They pull away and then orbit. They go silent and then reappear, drawn back by something they may not be able to articulate even to themselves. They tell themselves they are over it, that they needed the distance, that the space was the right call. And then something happens and the first person their mind goes to is you. You remain a presence even in your absence from their life. You live in the background of their thoughts in ways they find uncomfortable and cannot entirely silence. This orbiting, this inability to fully close the door and walk away, is one of the clearest indicators of authentic feeling. Because it is involuntary, it is not a strategy, it is not manipulation, although it can cause tremendous confusion and pain. It is a person who is at war with their own feeling, who knows that closeness is what they fear and what they want in equal measure, and losing the war just frequently enough to keep returning, to keep leaving a door slightly open, to keep being unable to make the full, final, clean exit that their survival instincts keep telling them to make. If they keep coming back, even after silences, even after their own apparent determination to stay away, that is not confusion. That is love fighting its way through the most heavily defended interior landscape imaginable. Now, here is where the conversation has to get honest in a way that a lot of people find uncomfortable. Because all of these signs, real as they are, meaningful as the love behind them genuinely is, do not make the relationship functional on their own. And one of the most painful disservices that can be done to someone who loves an avoidant is to spend so much time validating and explaining the avoidance feelings that the person on the receiving end forgets to ask whether those feelings are being expressed in a way that is livable. Love that cannot be communicated directly still causes damage. Love that hides behind conflict still wounds the person it is aimed at. Love that retreats every time it gets real still leaves someone standing in the cold, wondering what they did wrong. The avoidance love being real does not mean their behavior is acceptable. It does not mean you're obligated to be patient indefinitely, to absorb the withdrawal graciously, to make peace with a relationship that gives you depth only in sporadic flashes and then yanks it back before you can build anything stable on top of it. They are responsible for their patterns. They are responsible for the impact of their withdrawals on someone who loves them. The fact that those patterns come from a wounded place, from early experiences that were genuinely painful, genuinely formative, genuinely not their fault, is a context, not an absolution. A person can carry wounds and still be responsible for where those wounds lead them to aim. Hurt people, as the saying goes. But that does not make being on the receiving end of someone else's unprocessed pain a noble calling. It makes it suffering. Understanding the psychology of avoidant love also requires understanding what happens inside the avoidant when the relationship deepens beyond the point they can comfortably manage. There is a threshold, different for every avoidant, but always present, beyond which the closeness becomes more than their defenses can process without activating full retreat. Before this threshold, they can function within the relationship. They can be present, warm, engaged. They can access their genuine feelings, and in those moments, they are everything that made you fall for them in the first place. The real them, the unguarded version, the person behind all the armor. Reaching that threshold does not require you to do anything wrong. It does not require a fight or a betrayal or a major emotional event. Sometimes it requires nothing more than the relationship becoming real, than the love between you becoming undeniable, than the future starting to feel like something that could actually be built. Because for someone whose internal world has always associated that kind of certainty and depth with eventual pain, the approach of genuine happiness can be as frightening as the approach of loss. They do not know how to just be loved. That is not a small thing to take in. They have never learned how to simply receive consistent, non-conditional love and let it rest easily in them. Because every significant love in their early life came with instability or conditions or the lurking sense that it could be revoked. And so love, even good love, even your love, even the safest and most genuine love you are capable of offering, registers in some part of them as a countdown, as something that is good right now but will eventually hurt. And they would rather initiate the hurt, or preempt it, or escape before it arrives, than stay and wait for the confirmation of what they have always suspected. That they are, at some deep and terrible level, too much to be loved sustainably. That belief, that core wound, is what you are really up against. Not their feelings for you, Their feelings for you are not in question. What is in question is whether they can believe at the level of the nervous system and not just the intellect that you staying is real and will remain real. And most avoidants, until they do serious, sustained, honest work on themselves, cannot hold that belief. They know it in their mind. They may even say it out loud. But in the middle of the night, in the aftermath of a tender moment, in the specific silence of genuine happiness, the doubt comes. And the doubt drives the retreat. There is a particular experience that many people describe when they are in love with an avoidant, a sense of chasing something that keeps moving just out of reach, of getting close and watching them recede, of feeling at times as though you are loving someone who is standing on the other side of glass. You can see them. The connection is palpable, sometimes exquisitely so. But there is always this barrier, this transparent, inexplicable, infuriatingly invisible wall between you and the full unguarded version of them. That glass is the accumulated weight of everything they learned about love before you arrived. It is not personal in the sense that you did not create it. But it is deeply personal in the sense that it shapes every experience you have of them, and the maddening thing, the thing that makes this dynamic so hard to simply walk away from, is that there are moments when the glass disappears, when they are entirely, shatteringly present. When the walls come down and they look at you with something in their eyes that is so raw and true that it takes the breath right out of you. And in those moments you are not imagining things, you are not projecting. That is real, that is them, that is the love. And then the glass comes back, sometimes within minutes, sometimes within hours. And you are left holding the memory of the unguarded version and trying to reconcile it with the defended version that currently sits across from you, unreachable again, and wondering how both of those people can exist inside the same body. They can, because they do. The unguarded version is not a performance. The defended version is not the truth. They are both true, they are both real. They are the same person at different levels of fear. Another deeply important sign of authentic avoidant love, and one that tends to be profoundly misread, is the quality of their jealousy. An avoidant who does not love you will not react to the prospect of losing you with any particular emotional intensity. They may note it, they may experience a mild passing discomfort, but it will not animate them, it will not crack the surface of their composure. But an avoidant who loves you authentically will respond to the possibility of your loss with something that genuinely frightens them. The jealousy may not look conventional. It will probably not look like the open, communicative, emotionally expressive jealousy of a secure person who can say, honestly, I am afraid of losing you because you matter to me. It will look like something else. It might look like sudden availability, a re-engagement, a return of warmth, an unusual presence, right at the moment you seem furthest away. It might look like irritability or provocation. It might look like a disproportionate reaction to what seems, from your side, like something minor. But beneath all the shapes it takes, what it actually is proof. Proof that your presence in their life is not replaceable. That you occupy a specific and irreplaceable place in their inner world. That the idea of you being gone, truly gone, touches something in them that their day-to-day defenses cannot adequately protect. This is not a healthy dynamic when it is unacknowledged and unaddressed. Using jealousy as the primary vehicle for expressing love is its own form of emotional dysfunction, and you should not have to manufacture uncertainty about your availability just to feel prioritized by someone who loves you. That is an exhausting and ultimately corrosive way to live inside a relationship. But understanding jealousy as a sign, as a crack in the facade that reveals real depth of feeling, matters for knowing what you are dealing with. Here is something that gets very little airtime in the conversation about avoidant attachment, and it deserves space: the avoidance relationship with themselves. Because the patterns that damage you, the withdrawal, the emotional unavailability, the inability to sustain openness, are not patterns that exist only in how they relate to you. They exist in how they relate to themselves. An avoidant does not have a rich, uncomplicated, freely navigable interior emotional life. They have a relationship with their own feelings that is, in many ways, even more restricted than their relationship with yours. They do not sit with emotion easily. They do not process grief or fear or longing in the ordinary fluid way that people with healthier attachment styles can. When difficult feelings arise in them, and they do arise constantly, because they are human, they tend to be met with suppression, deflection, or translation into something more manageable. Activity, productivity, intellectual analysis. Control. The feeling gets rerouted rather than experienced. This means that when they love you, really love you, the experience of that love is also something they are routing around in some ways. Not extinguishing, not fabricating, but managing. Trying to keep at a temperature they can bear. Because full unmanaged love feels to them like standing in an open field in a storm, exposed, unprotected. Utterly dependent on something outside themselves for the quality of their emotional experience. And that kind of dependency is the thing their entire psychology was built to avoid. This is the deep tragedy of loving and avoidant. They want love. They want it profoundly, in the same way that every human being wants it. Perhaps more, because it was withheld early enough to make the wanting feel desperate underneath all that carefully maintained self-sufficiency. But the wanting and the receiving are two completely different experiences for them. Wanting feels safe because it is internal and private and controlled. Receiving feels dangerous because it requires them to be open. To be grateful, to acknowledge a need being met, which means acknowledging the need, which means admitting that they were not in the end entirely self-sufficient. And admission of need, even in the privacy of their own mind, even in the form of simply feeling happy in your presence, is one of the most vulnerable experiences available to them. When an avoidant loves you authentically, there will be moments, brief, usually unannounced, and often appearing when they believe themselves to be unobserved, of unguarded softness. These moments are not accidental. They are the real thing breaking through, the real them momentarily louder than the fear. You may notice it in the way they look at you when they think you are not watching. A quality of attention that is different from their usual guarded engagement, something quieter and more complete. Something that is not performing anything, not managing anything, simply being present with what it feels. Or you may notice it in the way they speak about you to others, if you are ever in a position to hear it secondhand, with a warmth and a specificity that they have never directed at you face to face. Because sometimes, avoidants find it easier to love people in the third person. To speak of you with tenderness to someone else when the directness of saying it to you is too exposed a position to hold. You may notice it in the way they reach for you in unguarded moments, in half-sleep, in crisis, in those seconds between waking and full consciousness where the defenses have not yet reassembled. In those moments, they reach. Because the body knows what the defended mind works so hard to complicate, the body knows where it wants to be, and in the window before the armor is back in place, it moves there. These moments matter. Not as a justification for staying in something painful, but as evidence of what is true underneath the patterns. Because if you have been doubting your own perception, if the withdrawal and the distance have made you wonder whether you imagine the depth of what passes between you, those unguarded moments are the answer. You did not imagine it. It is real. It is in them, running deeper than they know how to express consistently. What does an avoidant look like when they are trying to love you? When they are genuinely making an effort, not performing effort, not doing the minimum required to keep you from leaving, but actually trying to push against their own conditioning and be present for you? They look uncomfortable. That is the honest answer. They look like someone doing something that does not come naturally, because it does not. For a person who has spent their entire life learning not to need and not to show, learning to be present and expressive and emotionally available is the equivalent of writing with the non-dominant hand. It requires conscious effort for something that most people do automatically. And in the effort, there is awkwardness. There is the slightly stilted quality of someone saying the right words before they feel entirely natural. There is the reaching that is visible precisely because it does not quite land the way it would if it were easy. This is worth recognizing because a lot of people in relationships with avoidance dismiss these efforts as insufficient or inauthentic. And sometimes they are insufficient. Objectively, legitimately insufficient to meet the needs of a person who requires consistent emotional nourishment, but they are not inauthentic. The awkwardness is the authenticity. A person who found this easy would not look awkward doing it. The effort is visible precisely because it is real effort against real internal resistance for something they are choosing to do anyway because the love that drives it is genuine. There is something that needs to be said about the cruelty, and it is a kind of cruelty, even when unintentional, of the avoidance inconsistency. Because one of the most psychologically damaging aspects of loving someone with avoidant attachment is not the distance itself, it is the alternation. It is the fact that warmth and cold, presence and absence, openness and withdrawal rotate with enough unpredictability that you can never quite prepare for either. You cannot brace for the cold when it follows warmth so quickly. You cannot trust the warmth when the cold arrives so reliably in its wake. This inconsistency is not strategic. It is not calculated to keep you destabilized, although it does destabilize you. It is the visible surface of an internal war. The warm, present moments are when the love wins the internal battle. The cold, withdrawn moments are when the fear wins. And you, standing outside that internal war with no visibility into it, experience the casualties without understanding the combat. This is where it becomes important to say clearly, their internal war is not your responsibility to manage. You did not start it. You cannot finish it. And you should not be required to organize your emotional life around the unpredictable outcomes of a battle that has nothing to do with you and predates you by decades. The fact that the war is real, that the fear is genuine, and the love is genuine, and the conflict between them is exhausting for the avoidant as well as for you, does not make it okay that you are absorbing the collateral damage. Genuine love, expressed through patterns that consistently harm the person being loved, is still causing harm, and the person causing harm is still responsible. An avoidant in love will also, over time, reveal something very specific about the way they see the future, not through grand pronouncements. They are almost never capable of grand emotional pronouncements without immediately retreating from them, but through small telling behaviors, through the way they reference forward time in relation to you, through the casual assumption of your presence in future plans that they make almost accidentally, before the guarded part of them catches up and edits it back, through the way they speak about the future at all in the context of something the two of you share. Because an avoidant who does not love you does not plan around you, does not unconsciously slot you into the architecture of a life going forward. They keep their future carefully ring-fenced from the relationship, because the relationship has not crossed the threshold of genuine significance for them. But when you have crossed that threshold, when you have become genuinely, undeniably important, the future starts to acquire a shape that includes you, and sometimes that shape slips through before they can stop it. A passing comment, a casual we, a reference to something months away that assumes your presence as a given. These slips are not accidents, they are the love thinking ahead of the defenses. They are the part of them that has already built a life around you, quietly and without announcement, letting itself be seen for just a moment before the guarding instinct kicks back in. Here is the most important thing about avoidant love, and it is the thing that tends to be either overemphasized or entirely missing from these conversations, depending on who is telling the story. Their love being real is not the whole story. It is one chapter, and it is not the chapter that determines whether what you have together can become what you need it to be. Because love, in the absence of the willingness to do something about the patterns that prevent it from being expressed properly, is an internal experience that never fully makes it to the other person. It lives in them, real and sincere, and it sits behind walls that may never fully come down. And you, on the other side of those walls, may know intellectually that the love is there, may believe it, may have evidence of it in all the ways this conversation has described, and still be dying slowly of its inaccessibility. That is not a sustainable emotional life. That is not what love is supposed to cost. The avoidant who loves you authentically and also does nothing about the ways their patterns harm you is not a person whose love you are obligated to wait out. Understanding why they are the way they are is not the same as accepting that they will always be this way. Compassion for their wounds does not require you to keep receiving those wounds indefinitely. What changes things, the only thing that genuinely changes the architecture of avoidant attachment, is their decision to change it. Not your patience, not your understanding. Not your willingness to tolerate the cycle one more time in the hope that this time the warmth will last. Their decision, their work, their confrontation with the patterns that have driven everyone who genuinely loved them to a point of exhausted surrender. Some avoidants make that decision, some of them when the loss becomes real enough, when the damage they have caused becomes visible enough, when the person they love communicates clearly enough that the patterns are not survivable, they choose differently. They do the work, they sit with the discomfort of their own conditioning instead of running from it. They build, slowly and imperfectly, a new way of being in relationship. And the love that was always there, always real, becomes something that can actually be received. But that is their journey, and it cannot begin until they decide it begins. What you are doing, staying aware, staying honest, trying to understand what is real and what is pattern, trying to separate the person from their wounds, while also holding them accountable for the impact of those wounds. That is extraordinarily hard emotional work. It is the kind of work that most people never even attempt. Most people either demonize the avoidant entirely, which is simpler and less accurate, or they make endless excuses for them, which is kinder and equally inaccurate. You are trying to hold the full complexity, to see them clearly, the love and the damage, the genuine feeling and the genuine dysfunction, the wounded person and the person who is responsible for managing their wounds so they do not become your wounds. That complexity is worth something. That clarity is hard-won and important. But clarity about their love does not have to translate into a decision to stay. That is the thing that gets lost. Understanding that they love you deeply, authentically, in the only way their architecture currently allows, is not a reason to override your own needs. Your needs are real. Your need for consistency is real. Your need for a love that shows up on ordinary days and not just in charged moments of crisis or reunion is legitimate and non-negotiable. You do not have to earn the right to that. You do not have to be less sensitive, less needy, less human, in order to deserve a love that meets you where you are. The signs of authentic avoidant love are written in a language that takes time to learn. They are in the actions, not the declarations. In the fear, not the absence of feeling. In the inability to leave rather than in the willingness to stay. In the unguarded moments, the forward slips, the jealousy that cracks the surface, the practical devotion that substitutes for words they do not yet know how to say. They are real. All of it is real. And you, in loving them, in staying attuned to all of this, in doing the emotional labor of understanding a psychology that works overtime to resist being understood, you have given something remarkable. Something patient and perceptive and generous beyond what was required of you. The question worth sitting with, the question that this understanding now makes possible in a way it was not before, is not whether they love you. The evidence of that lives in too many places to be honestly denied. The question is whether the love they are currently capable of expressing is enough to build a life on. Whether the avoidant in front of you is willing to grow toward you, or whether the love will remain real and the distance will remain impassable. Whether you are waiting for a door to open that they are capable of opening, or a door that their unaddressed patterns have sealed from the inside. That question deserves an honest answer. And you deserve to live in the truth of that answer, whatever it turns out to be. Not in the hope of what could be, not in the evidence of what is real underneath the surface. In the honest, grounded, clear-eyed truth of what is actually being offered. And whether that offering is enough for someone who loves the way you love, because you do love, fully, without the armor, without the retreat. You showed up open, and you stayed open even when the opening kept costing you. That is not something everyone can do. That is not something everyone is willing to do. And it says something about you, something important, something worth honoring, that you brought that quality of love into this. Now bring it to yourself, with the same fullness, the same honesty, the same refusal to settle for something that cannot quite reach you. Because you have always known, somewhere underneath the hoping and the understanding and the waiting, exactly what you need. And you have always deserved to have it.